In this tutorial, we're going to be setting up TF on this avatar. This is going to be split up into 5 parts. First off, we're going to be walking through some of the options and the concepts of a transformation animation in the Goo shader. Next up, we're going to be setting up a very common transformation animation, which is the Radial animation. After that, we're going to be hooking up the animation to an actual VRChat toggle that you can use to trigger the TF, and then go back into a normal state from the TF. Then we're going to be setting up a prop that's only shown when the avatar is in the normal pre-TF state, and then gets hidden when we go into the TF state through the TF animation. And then lastly, we're going to be walking through some of the issues that you might run into when trying to set up TF on your avatar. So let's get started. First, let's take a look at the transformation tab and learn more about the concepts of transformation in the Goo shader. So on the body material here, I'm going to turn on transformation. And as you can see, immediately the body went white. What's going on is now that we are in the pre-TF state. By default, when you turn on transformation, we're actually going to be using this pre-TF material right here, which is currently set up to just look white like the standard Unity material. And the pre-TF material here pretty much lets you specify the pre-TF state that your avatar will be in. And so, for example, I can choose a different main color here. I can choose a different texture that I'm going to put in here, a different secondary color, different AO map, different metallic and smoothness, etc., right? And the thing is, you can actually share these values between the Goo material and the pre-TF material. We have these separate main color, separate secondary color, separate, etc. checkboxes here. And what that means is that when we check one of these separate checkboxes, the pre-TF material is going to be using a different value than the Goo material, right? So if we were to uncheck this separate main color, what's going to happen is we're going to be using the Goo material main color instead. And this is very useful in case you want to share certain properties between the Goo and the pre-TF material. So for example, very commonly, you want to share the ambient occlusion. Right now, we don't have any ambient occlusion texture in this, but if I were to drag an ambient occlusion texture into the Goo material, as you can see, something changed on the pre-TF material. And that's because we specify that we actually don't want to use a separate occlusion map. If we were to specify that, hey, we want a separate occlusion map, then we have to specify that specific ambient occlusion map that we want, right? Same thing for everything, right? Maybe we want to share emissions, so we need to uncheck separate emission, right? And now it's going to be using the emission of the Goo material, right? Again, this is very useful if you want to keep things separated or to keep things shared. And so next up, we're currently in this pre-TF material. And now how do we go from this pre-TF material into the actual Goo material? Well, we do that with the animations. And we can choose from 2 types of animations, the built-in animations and the manual animations. The built-in animations are various animations that we've built into the shader itself to be used with minimal setup and to get running as fast as possible. Manual animations are things that you can pretty much create yourself using mask channels and oscillators. If you have a specific idea for an animation that isn't implemented in the built-in animations, you can try to create it using mask channels and oscillators. So how do these animations work? Well, let's use an example. If we were to go into the built-in animation and select the very simple built-in animation, we'd get this animation slider, right? And what this means is how far are we in the animation, pretty much. 0 is going to give us the pre-TF material, whereas 1 is going to give us the Goo material. Same thing with the masks, right? We can choose to have a texture mask, for example, here. Let's set texture mask 2, and then go and enable that texture mask, and set this to be some kind of noise texture, cobblestone. And as you can see, the mask is actually driving the TF right now. And what's going to happen is that black parts of this mask correspond to the pre-TF material, as you can see. And then white parts correspond to the black material, as you can see. Now, there are some limitations as to what masks you can use for this. However, all of the ones that are available are hidden in this dropdown. And in case you do use a mask that is unavailable through one of these blend ones, then we'll show you a warning saying that, hey, some things might not be wrong here because you're not using a mask that's available at this point in time for the transformation. Unfortunately, this is something that we have to deal with due to technical limitations. If you want to learn more about mask channels and how to use them, we have an in-depth video tutorial in the description, as well as a whole manual section on mask channels right here in the FAQ. You can also use oscillators for the manual animation as well. And if you want to learn more about what oscillators are, you can go ahead and learn through the manual or through the video available in the description. The next concept to be aware of is bulging. This is something that you can use to give a little spice to your transformations. Let's go into the radial animation real quick and enable bulging. And now, if we were to move the slider, as you can see, there's a certain deformation that happens at the very edges of the animation now. And it's, as you can see, it is the bulging. And we can adjust the size of it. We can even make it bulge in. And we can also adjust the offset of the bulging. Now, this offset is only available in built-in animations due to some technical limitations. So this is a nifty thing to add a little bit of extra life to the animation itself. Another concept to be aware of is that certain features are disabled by default on the pre-TF material. These features are the dripping and deformation of the goo. As you can see, apply deformation on pre-TF material and apply dripping on pre-TF material are all turned off. We can, of course, turn these on. I'm going to go ahead and go back into the pre-TF material. As you can see, it's gooey and dripping. And of course, we can disable them so that the avatar looks normal. Touch reactivity also has this option right here. So right now, pre-TF won't be touch reactive, and now it is touch reactive. The fake reflection probe also has this option, but it has an option to only apply to the post-TF material, to the goo TF material. By default, it'll apply to both the pre-TF and post-TF material, and with this, it'll only apply to the post-TF material. The physics feature also has an option to apply onto the pre-TF material. And the last thing to know of is this preview right here. We can use this in built-in animations to just preview what the animation will look like without having to constantly move this animation slider or hook up an oscillator to it. That's about it for the concepts of transformation. Okay, now let's set up a radial animation on this avatar. I'm going to be working with all these materials on the avatar at the same time. So let's select all of them and work with them at the same time. So first off, let's turn on transformation. And we'll immediately switch to the pre-TF material because there is no animation running right now. So the first course of action is to set up the pre-TF material. So this is again going to be the state that your avatar will be in before the TF happens. So what I'm going to do for this one is I'm just going to drag my normal textures in. So find your textures. And of course, you're going to have different textures here and you're going to have different needs as well. And again, if you want to learn about more of what this is, we cover this in the concepts in the earlier part of the video. So I'm just going to drag my textures into this now. So now our avatar looks like normal, and this is going to be how it looks before the animation kicks in and transforms the avatar into the goo material. So now let's select all of the materials again and go into built-in animations and select the radial with noise. And as you can see now, if we move the slider, the avatar will go from normal to gooey. And the radial with noise built-in animation requires the avatar to be baked. If you haven't baked your avatar, please watch one of our basic avatar setup videos in the description to learn more about avatar baking. So let's go ahead and get started with this. So I'm going to first of all start tweaking the radius of the animation itself, because right now when it's maxed out, it's not covering the whole avatar. So I'm going to go into the radial animation editor and select the body of the avatar. And as you can see, we have this nifty little tool that we can move around to specify the origin of the animation, the radius, and various other options that we'll get to in a bit. So I'm just going to increase the radius so that the wings are fully covered, like that, and pick an origin that I like. The tips are covered as well. Okay, awesome. Now, click Finish, and now we can move the slider again to preview the animation. I'm just going to turn on Preview for now and adjust the speed of the preview, so I can kind of keep an eye on the animation as I tweak settings here. And if the animation isn't consistent for you across your different objects on the avatar, make sure that all the objects are, first off, baked. And if it's still a problem, then go ahead and jump to the issues section of the tutorial, because we're going to be covering what to do in that situation. Let's go ahead and configure this more. I want to add a noise map to this. So what this will do is it'll add a little bit of spice to the edges of the animation. So I'm going to add one of the included noise maps. I think I'm going to go with cobblestone, because it adds a little bit of that texture to it. I like that. I'm going to keep that. And of course, we can tweak some of these settings here, but I'm actually not going to tweak any of these settings. If you would like to learn more about what these settings do, please refer to these documentation buttons right here. I am going to tweak the color and bulge blur options right here. So I'm going to disable the preview. I'm going to tweak these a little bit, because I'd like the color to be a little bit more blurred here, a little bit dirtier, right? And then I'm going to enable bulging. And oof, that's a little bit too much. We're going to turn down the bulge size to about 2.5 and then adjust the blur of the bulge so it's a little bit more friendly. Negative values don't matter here. You can have a negative or positive value. The sign of the value doesn't really matter that much. Okay, I like that. You can adjust these values in the editor as well. We have these little handles here, but sometimes when the radius is too big, you want to actually just adjust these individually right here. Go back to our preview, and I think I like that. Okay, that's about it for setting up the radial animation itself. As you can see, our avatar is animating properly. And again, if you're having issues, skip to the issue section of the video. Now, let's set up a toggle and an animation clip that will be triggered by that toggle. So we can actually trigger this in-game. So this is going to require us to use the animation features of the Goo shader. And if you would like to learn more about them, we have a separate video available in the description. So we're pretty much going to need to disable the preview on all the materials here. And then we're going to need to animate this animation slider to go from 0 to 1, right? And you're going to want to make sure that your animation here is set to be animated. So make sure that it has this red background, and also that this button is set to red and it's not like this. You need to make sure this is animated. If you would like to learn more about why this is, you can watch the animation tutorial in the description. Next up, you're going to want to go onto your avatar root object, and then scroll down to the avatar descriptor, and find playable layers, expand it, and find the FX layer right here. Click on it, and keep note of where it is in the project view right here. We're going to take it and drag it onto our avatar root object, and then we're going to go into play mode. We're now going to create the animation clips first off. So, in the scene view, your avatar is going to be like, in a weird state like this, but this is fine. So we're going to double click on our animation layer right here, and it's going to show us the animation tab. And I'm just going to drag that down there. We're going to keep this around, and then we're also going to go into window, animation, and then have this window dock here as well. Next up, we're going to select this avatar object right here. Go down to animation, find this drop down. This is going to say different things for you, but find this drop down, press create new clip, go over into a folder where you would like to save this clip. I'm going to go into my Goo folder right here, and I'm going to title it Goo Off. This is going to now hold the state of the avatar when the Goo toggle is off. So you can animate things that you want to be shown when you are not in the Goo mode, so to say. And so to record things, we're going to press this button. And the first thing that we're going to do with this is we're going to go into our body right here. That's going to contain our materials right here. And we're going to go ahead and select any one of the Goo materials right here. Go to transformation, built-in animations. And then move this animation slider up and then back to 0, right? As you can see, only the body is animating right here. And this means that we're going to need to do this on all the objects on the avatar that have a Goo material that will TF. So this also means the hair and the wings, because they are separate objects for me. So I'm going to click on the wings, find the material, move it, and then back to 0. Wings, material, move it back to 0. And you want to make sure that you're animating these materials while you have these objects selected. You want to make sure that the materials themselves are on, like in the inspector, they're on the object, so to say. You don't want to go ahead and click on the body here and animate it here, because this is not going to do anything at all. As you can see, I'm trying to move the body, but nothing's happening. You want to go on the body itself and find the material and then move it. So next up, we're going to be creating the Goo On clip. So click this drop down, create a new clip, name it Goo On. Now let's do the same thing. Let's just record. But now let's move the animation slider up to 1. So that's on the body. That's on the wings. Oh, that just circled back on the wings. And then on the hair. Perfect. And now we have our animation clips. Now we can leave play mode, go back into our animator tab, go into the base layer, and remove these two Goo Off and Goo On clips. We won't need them. Let's add a new layer by clicking this plus button and name it Goo TF Toggle. Let's click the cogwheel and set the weight to 1. Next, let's find our two clips here and drag them in. As you can see, entry now points to Goo On. And so by default, this avatar is now going to have the Goo animation on. So if we go into play mode, we'll see that our avatar immediately becomes gooey, because it's by default, it's in the Goo On state. And this is where you get to choose whether or not you want your avatar by default to be in the Goo On or Goo Off state. And so to choose between these two, what you can do is right click on the state and set as layer default state. So now this is going to make Goo Off be the default state. So if we go into play mode, we'll see that our avatar is not gooey. That's what I'm going to be doing for this tutorial right here, but you can choose whichever one you want. And so I'm going to make a transition now by right-clicking on Goo Off and then click on Goo On. So we now have a transition from off to on. Now we're going to do the same thing, on to off. And now we have two transitions. Awesome. Now, let's make some parameters. Let's go into the parameters tab, click this plus, Boolean, scroll down. You might need to click a couple times. Let's double click on the name and name this GooTF. Now, remember the name of this because this is going to be important. I'm actually going to copy this so we can use this later. Let's go back to layers. Now let's click on the transition from GooOff to GooOn. The arrow is going to point to GooOn. Now in the inspector tab, we're going to configure this. So expand settings. Let's set exit time to 0 and uncheck has exit time. Now we can choose the transition duration to be the length of the TF animation itself. I'm going to set it to 5 seconds. In the list of conditions, let's add a new condition. Let's set the parameter of this condition to be GooTF, and then make sure it's set to true. Now, let's go to the GooOn to GooOff transition. It's going to be this one. The arrow is going to be pointing to GooOff. Let's do the same thing here. Exit time to 0, has exit time off, and then transition duration will be set to however long you want this animation to take. So I want the process of going from GUI to a normal material to be taking 5 seconds. So we're going to do that. I'm going to type in 5 seconds. And then in conditions, add a new one, GooTF, set this to false. So we're going to start off in GooOff, and then when GooTF is set to true, we're going to go to GooOn over 5 seconds. Then we're going to stay in GooOn, and then when GooOff is set to false, we're going to transition to GooOff, and that transition is going to take 5 seconds. Okay, and now we can test this by going into play mode, selecting our avatar root object right here, going into scene view and going into parameters right here, and then clicking GooTF here. And as you can see, our animation works fine. Then if we uncheck, we can see how the animation now moves backwards. Now let's set up the parameters on the avatar and the menu. So let's go to our avatar root object, scroll down the avatar root descriptor, and find these expressions right here. Let's click on the menu and the parameters and take note of where these are. We're going to go into the parameters first, and we're going to add this parameter right here, exactly how it's worded. We're going to copy this name, and then click add here. And then on the newly added parameter, we're going to paste that name in, set the type to bool. And now, if you've decided that you want GooOff by default, the default value here is going to be off, right? And if you want GooOn by default, this is going to be on. And now save here just means that this value is going to be remembered across avatar switches and world hops. So for example, if you turn the TF on and then you swap worlds, then once you load into this avatar in that new world, this value is going to be true. The GooTF is going to be true, and you're immediately going to be transforming. I personally don't want this to happen, so I'm going to turn off saved. And this means that whenever you switch avatars or hop worlds, we're going to revert back to the default value right here. Synced means that this value is going to be synced to other people. So if synced is on, and then you decide to use the Goo toggle, other people are going to see that Goo toggle. They're going to see that you're doing this animation. If this is off, only you are going to be able to see it. So let's keep this on. Okay, now let's go into our menu, add control, and we can name this whatever we want. Let's name this GooTF toggle. Set the type to the toggle, and parameter to GooTF. And that's it. And now you can go ahead, upload your avatar, and use this in game. And now, let's say I have this glasses asset that I would like to hide when the transformation has occurred. There are a couple ways of doing this. We can actually animate the GooOn animation clip to have this be disabled. We can set something up on the materials of these glasses to have them dissolve into nothing. Or we can use the Goo shader on the glasses and then pretty much have the TF animation itself hide the glasses. That's what I'm going to show you how to do here. So I'm going to start off and take any one of these animations that we've set up already, any one of these materials, and we're going to duplicate them. Because what we want to do here is we actually want to preserve these transformation settings right here. We're going to be deleting everything on the Goo material and the pre-TF material, but I'm just going to name this lenses. I'm going to go into the Goo material and delete pretty much all these textures because I'm not going to need any of them. And go into pre-TF and also delete them all. Now I'm going to duplicate this again and call this frames. I'm going to then drag the frames onto the frames and then the lenses onto the lenses. I'm going to select both of them and disable Goo because I don't want the glasses to be gooey. And then I'm going to go ahead and set up the textures and the material properties of this on the pre-TF material because I want these glasses to be normal before the TF happens. And then when the TF happens, I'm going to want them to disappear. So we're going to set that up later a little bit. But first off, let's start with the pre-TF material. For the lenses, I'm going to set rendering mode to transparent, texture to this bluish color, and then opacity, something like this. Smoothness and metallic. Yeah, let's just keep smoothness up. And for the frames, I'm gonna drag the frame texture, set the smoothness to this, and then the metallic to that. That looks good. And so now, if we select both the frames and lenses, we can actually animate them, right? Things are happening, and so I want to disable the bulging for this. And it also seems like it's not animating uniformly. And this means that this mesh isn't baked. So let's just bake it real quick. Make mesh. And let's go into frames and lenses. Okay, now that looks about right. So if we select all of our materials right here and use the animation, as you can see, the animation of the glasses is synced up with the animation of the rest of their avatar. So now we can set up the frames and the lenses to disappear when the goo is on. And so the way we can do that is by pretty much making the goo material be completely invisible. So for the frames, what we're going to do here, because they're set to opaque in the rendering mode, we're going to set them to be cutout instead. And then on the opacity on the goo material, we're going to set that to 0. And now, when we do the transformation, frames are just going to straight up disappear. And now for the lenses, because they're set to transparent, we can't just really set the opacity to 0, because transparent is realistic transparency, and you can't really have something be completely see-through realistically. So there's still some transparency happening, as you can see, some shininess. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to set this to fade, which is non-PBR realistic transparency. And that means that opacity of 0 literally pretty much means that this is something that cannot be visible. And so, as you can see, they're just going to disappear. So if we go ahead and select all materials right now, run the animation, you can see that the glasses just straight up disappear. And we didn't need to hide any of the objects. And now, of course, for optimization purposes, you can also just go ahead and hide the glasses, because they're still active, as well, right? You can go ahead and add that as an extra little thing to the animation. You might need to tweak the animation itself at that point, which is a little bit more of an advanced thing, and you need to like restructure the animation. So if you don't know how to do that, I'd say don't attempt that and just go ahead with this, because this will be perfectly fine for these use cases. And yeah, that's about it. Okay, and now for the troubleshooting. Whenever you're trying to use the Radial with noise built-in animation, there may be situations where the animation doesn't quite sync up properly between your objects. As you can see, in this example, the hair should have already started to animate, and so have the wings, right? The wings should have animated as well, but what's going to happen is they're going to animate a bit later into the animation itself, and they're not really kind of like synced up with everything. There could be numerous things that happen here. First off, in the case of the wings, you have to make sure that they're baked. Right now, they aren't baked. So you just right-click on the skin mesh renderer and bake the mesh. Ignore this in the situation. And as you can see now, everything's working fine with the wings. In the context of the hair here, they are baked, but what happened was that I actually baked them when they were somewhere over here. And then later on, I moved them to be there. And so what happens is that the shader still thinks that the hair is over here, and so the animation acts as if the hair is over here, because of when we baked it. So to fix this, we're going to have to rebake the hair, pretty much. What also could be happening is that the way that this hair is set up on our avatar, maybe it's done with parent constraints, or maybe the root bone here is set to something on avatar's armature as opposed to the hair's armature. Maybe you have some kind of weird setup of how this is installed. That's also going to cause issues. What you also might want to do is take the hair asset and just remove anything that might inhibit it from freely moving like this. Maybe like a parent constraint or some kind of root bone thing right here. You're going to want to undo those things and then be able to move this object freely, and then position it in the location where it actually will end up being, bake it then, and then turn those parent constraints on or reset the root bone thing right here. That way the bake data and the actual position lines up properly. But in these situations, it's going to kind of be a bit of a hack of how you solve this. There's unfortunately no easy solution to this. And so if just rebaking the mesh doesn't fix the problem for you, which in this case it did solve the problem for me, you're either going to have to live with those things or decide to use a different animation for either just that mesh or the whole avatar itself. All right, so maybe in the hair's situation, I'm just going to use a very simple animation instead. And now in this situation, I actually don't need the bulging because that kind of messes things up. Well, it's not the best animation for this, as you can see. So maybe for the hair, I actually want to do center out instead. You shouldn't be having any of these problems with center out. You might want to actually just switch the center out for the whole avatar, for example, right? Like we can do that, right? And now the whole avatar kind of animates uniformly. Of course, you'd have to kind of tweak the animation stuff, like maybe not use the animation map and the bulging when you're using center out, because I don't think they look that well in this situation. But you're going to have to start to mess around with these and kind of figure out what is going to work for your avatar here. The next issue you might have is that certain meshes with bulging on might create these holes when animating. And this right here is to do with these edges, these normals. These normals are discontinuous, which creates this nice edge in the hair, but also it by nature creates this split when the bulging happens because we move along the normals, right? So what you need to do here to solve this is bake the hair or bake the mesh with smooth normals. As you can see, that's going to destroy those custom normals that we had, but this is just a trade-off that you have to do to get a smooth bulging animation like this that doesn't have any holes in it. And of course, if you don't like the results of this smooth normals bake, you can also go ahead and try out an FBX import smooth normals option right here in the smooth normals Unity method text file. It's available in the Goo folder right here. And yeah, that's about it. And if you have any more questions, we have a whole manual right here available to you that you can read up on. And if that doesn't help, we also have a whole Discord server where you can join in, verify your purchase, and ask questions. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can. That's about it. Have fun!